Thanks for the opportunity to come and speak today. One thing that Mark won't tell you on my bio is that I was actually too short to join the police. I was in a bit of a desperate situation. I was an extreme failure as a young officer in the Army, and I was disowned by my family. I found myself sleeping in parks around Brisbane. I was sleeping near the river for a while and sleeping in a car underneath friends' houses, and I was sleeping on their couches and things. So some friends talked me into trying to join the police, and believe it or not, the police in 1986 didn't seem very popular to me. The police came to my house regularly. We had a lot of domestic violence and trouble in my house. So I was a bit desperate. I went in, I did all the testing, I did all the selections, and unfortunately the last thing they did was measure you. And I thought, I'm a centimetre too short. The lady gave me the news and I left with my tail between my legs. And I thought, what am I going to do now? Like, I was literally one step away from being homeless long term. You know, my mates were into worse stuff than I was. I was lucky I had a few good mates who would keep me on the straight and narrow. But I spoke to my doctor and he said, you know, when you get measured in the morning, you're actually a little bit taller. He said, from laying down at night, he said, your spine decompresses, he said, and your body relaxes. He said, you're a little bit taller. So I didn't want to leave anything to chance. I had mates that went to the gym, and all the rage back in those days were those inversion boots. You hung upside down, stretch yourself out. So I got a pair of those and I hung on the clothesline at the back of my mate's place, and he kept spinning me around, which still pissed me off today. But I somehow managed to feel like I had at least grown a centimetre, and whilst the statute of limitations has expired and the height limit's gone now, I may have worn 3 thick pairs of socks to the next measurement. But I walked in at 8 o'clock in the morning. I drove there in my mate's car, laid down in the back seat so that I didn't compress. I didn't shrink on the way in, and I walked in, and the lady at police recruiting was very nice. She put her arm around me. She said, come in, little fella, when we'll give you another go. And I was 172, she patted me on the head too. I was 172 centimetres on that day, and that day only. Now, Mark was there at the academy. We walked in together, and I do remember the way he looked at me as if to say, how did you get in here, you little thing? But I suppose the joke's on them, because a number of years later, I found myself in charge of the biggest police station in Queensland. City Police Station was not a place I wanted to go. I was happily ensconced as the officer in charge at Indooroopilly. Had fantastic neighbourhood watch groups out of Kenmore in particular, run by police that lived in the area and community volunteers who really owned their chapters. It was a good suburban station, no real dramas. You know, just had a few lazy police I had to kick out now and then to go and do their job, but that was okay. When Peter Martin, who's now the Commissioner for Corrections, you know, one of the great leaders we've had in the police, said, you need to come and have a coffee with me, I've got a job for you. And he encouraged me to apply for the officer in charge at City Station. Now, I didn't want the job. I didn't want it for a number of reasons, as the place had a really bad reputation. City Station at the time, 2007, had a reputation for being heavy-handed. They had a lot of complaints against police for excessive use of force. There was a really bad video circulating about police and arresting a homeless man, a fella called Rowe. He was a 65-year-old bloke that had been to church, who was doing his business in the city council toilets, washing his hands and doing his daily routine when the council wanted to wash the toilets and clean them up, and they had a confrontation with him, and police got involved, and the police ended up putting this guy on the ground and having a terrible fight, where police were actually charged with assaulting him eventually, the first criminal prosecution by a member of the public against police ever in Queensland. They had a really bad reputation externally for how heavy-handed and nasty they were, and I thought, why would I want to go and bloody work there? You're out of your mind. But every now and then you've got to trust someone who knows you probably better than you know yourself, and I got the job. And I just did something very unusual for the first few months. I shut up. I listened to the coppers, and I listened to the community, because at Indooroopilly I had good community, and they were telling me and they were educating me about what they wanted and what they expected from me, and that really helped guide what we were doing next. In the city, the police told me they were really worried about homeless people, that they had nothing to offer them but a night in the watch house, 4 hours sleep and maybe a dodgy meal. Maybe they'd be a bit better for that 4 hours in the watch house, maybe they wouldn't. Police were telling me that they had nothing to offer young kids, and the kids they had trouble with at night time, because they were the only ones dealing with them at 2 o'clock in the morning when they were drunk and playing up. They told me other things, that they were worried about people that were homeless so much that they often paid for accommodation out of their own pocket, chipped in and paid for people to get a night off the street in a boarding house or in a backpackers, just so they could do something. And I thought, this doesn't sound like the mongrels that everyone was telling me, that city police were heavy-handed and they were bashing homeless people and they were doing this. So I not only kept my mouth shut, but I also looked around and I worked shifts. I worked the night shifts and I worked shifts with police. Didn't just sit in my office and send emails, as tempting as it is. One thing I noticed, and you'll see on this picture, is that if anyone knows the city, that's right outside the Adelaide Street police beat. So if the homeless people and the police had this conflict, then why would they be sleeping outside the police beat? But the police told me that that's where the homeless people tried to sleep because they felt safe, because they felt that the police would look after them, because they were in a safe area. And I thought, well, all these things I'm hearing is contradictory to the reputation of the things I'm hearing outside. So for some reason we'd lost control over the message and we were losing the fight against our identity in the community by these bad things popping up all the time and the good things never being noticed. So I did something odd again where I asked the police themselves what they think we should do, and they said, one of the crankiest old sergeants who was also in our squad, he said, oh, we should treat these homeless people like criminals. I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, when we know criminals, we know everything about them. We know where they live, where they go to their girlfriends or boyfriends, what car they drive, the history and everything. He said, but we don't really know anything about these homeless people. Well, that's a really good point. Like, if we're going to help someone or we want to get involved, we need to know something about them. Across the road from that police station at Adelaide Street, the little police beat, was a fellow called Doug. Now, he sat in his wheelchair there for 11 years and lived there for 11 years. He was very unwell, had a big swollen leg. Obviously, he smelt like a homeless bloke, so not too many people lived next to him. So the first thing I did is I went over and I sat down next to him. Doug recoiled, he moved away from me and he said, am I in trouble? He said, have I done something wrong? I said, no, mate, I'm the officer in charge of the police station. I'm a new kid on the block. I've only just started. I just want to come and see what the go is. I said, everyone says you've been here for a long time. He said, this is where I live. He said, I camp my chair here as I go to the library at lunchtime. I said, Doug, let's have a little experiment. I said, I want you to do something for me. I said, gave him my business card. I said, when the police talk to you from now on, tell them that you're my uncle. I said, and we'll see what happens. So I asked around the station and I said, what's the go with that fella Doug? They said, oh, that's Doug, he's all right. He just lives over there. He's no trouble. We don't get any drama. I said, yeah, but what's the go? Where does he come from? Where's his family from? I said, why is he there? I said, couldn't we get someone to come and help Doug? Like, if you're at a country station and you had a bloke sleeping across the road from your police station for 11 years, you get your bum kicked for not going to help him. You get your bum kicked for not knowing someone in the community who could work with you to get that bloke some help, whether it was your job or not, or whether you saw it as your job or not. It would be the decent thing to do. You certainly wouldn't be walking past him for 11 years saying, someone should help that fella, but it's not me. Doug got pretty good service from the police when they thought he was my uncle, I tell you. People were coming into my office, oh, Senior, I'm so sorry. I didn't know that. We took him a cup of coffee and everything today. He seems to be going all right. And Doug was viewed like, the golden child from that point onwards. He was drinking coffee and getting free pies, and the troops were dropping in on him regularly. I had to confess that I do have 17 uncles and aunties, and some of them are a bit dodgy, but Doug wasn't one of them. But the lesson wasn't lost on the police. I said, see how you treated that man when you thought he was someone you knew. We just heard people talk about social isolation, about community connection, about working together with people. Might not be our job, and I was told pretty quickly, homelessness is not your job, mate. My inspector, Peter Aiken, a great bloke, said to me, he said, you better be careful. He said, you're on probation. He said, if you lose track of the crime, of the assaults and the robberies and the break-and-enters and that thing in your area, he said, you'll suffer at the next performance review. He said, if you want to do all this business about homelessness and vulnerable people, you're going to have to do it in your own time. We're going to have to call it a project. So a project's a sneaky way of telling you you've got extra work to do, I'm sure. So I thought, oh, fair enough. We couldn't avoid it. We was having so much interaction with homeless people, so much interaction with young people who were sleeping rough. It was damaging our reputation. It was damaging the culture of the coppers themselves. It was demoralising and demeaning. It was really disheartening for them to think that they were doing this by themselves. There was nobody coming out to help us. I had my next experience in this when a mate of mine who ran the Stamford Hotel rang me up. He used to be in the police, and he said, oh, you're in charge of city now? I said, yeah. He goes, oh, I need some police down here. We had a bloke, he's run through the Stanford Plaza, he's in the fine dining area, and he's just grabbed a prawn cocktail off Kate Blanchett's plate, and he's screaming out that he's just come back from Afghanistan. I said, oh, mate, I know exactly who that would be. It was a bloke called John who used to sleep in the park, who had these episodes. You know, he had been in the army, but he'd never been to war. I said, John, what do you want us to do? I said, we arrest this bloke 3 or 4 times a week to give him somewhere to sleep. I said, we're really not helping him. He goes, well, that's the problem. He said, maybe you should bloody help him. And I'm lucky it was a friend that rang me who could speak frankly. He said, weren't you in the army? I said, yeah. He said, how would you like to be treated if you were sleeping in a park? He said, would you like to be taken to the watch house or would you like to be helped? So I thought, oh, fair enough, fair call. I rang every homeless service in Brisbane. I rang them, everyone that had a nice website, everyone that had a nice research paper, everyone that had a pretty strong opinion, and I couldn't get one person to come out with the coppers and talk to this bloke right then and there. I even rang someone called the Homeless Mental Health Outreach Team. I thought, he's homeless, he's got mental health. And John was a bloke who'd drink blue Listerine for breakfast and, you know, he'd go to the toilet where he stood, he was very unwell. So I rang this Homeless Mental Health Outreach Team and they said, oh, can you get him to make an appointment? And I said, oh, goodness. I said, have you ever met a homeless person? I said, because he hasn't got a diary, he's not got an iPad. I said, this bloke doesn't know what day it is. I said, if you need me to take you by the hand and come and introduce you to someone that the police are dealing with all the time, I said, so be it. And the lady was nice enough. She said, I'll start a file on him. I said, that's good. Good for you, love. I said, I had to ring up and apologise later on because part of my plan was to develop friends with all these people to help us. So I wasn't in staff on the right foot, but I thought, there it is. I felt the same frustration that the coppers felt every time they were dealing with someone who they wanted to help, who they knew they should help, but they couldn't. They couldn't help them because they didn't have the friendships, they didn't have the relationships, they didn't have the partnerships with people from outside, the things that Neighbourhood Watch provide in places all over Queensland. It was unexpected for me to come up with this idea because I'd come from a tactical background. You know, I turned some of the skills I'd learnt in the army into other things. I was a member of the Special Weapons Team, the Riot Squad. You know, I'd been in tactical teams. I was in a squad we used to fly around Queensland, arrest the hell out of everyone, then go back to Brisbane. We were very popular in Brisbane, not in Charters Towers. We arrested 75 people in one night at the BNS ball there, and I think we destroyed that. It never happened again. But that was a reputation. I ran these big crime operations and we'd come down to schoolies back in the days when, you know, we were arresting hundreds of people, not as well run as it is now. And people expected that I would come there and say, oh, we're going to kick some bum in the city and take some names and clean the place up. So when I said we should actually help people, people looked at me like I was talking French. And my boss, again, he was very cautious, which is why we made it a project. And I think this actually helped, that people could see that I'd changed my point of view because I looked at the people like people. I looked at people like Doug and like John like people, and I thought, we can't arrest them. It's not working. We can't keep arresting these people. It's wasting our time. It's doing more harm than good. So we got police to talk to people, not when they were grabbing a prawn cocktail off a Hollywood A-lister's plate, not when there was a crisis or some poor old bloke was washing his hands in the dunnies and the council wanted to clean them, but we got to talk to them. The kids under this bridge here, probably 20 or 30 kids sleep under this bridge, and it's the same kids that come down here on the weekends too. They have their weekends down the Gold Coast and come and sleep under the bridge there. Don't talk to them when they're drunk or when there's a problem. Talk to them. We started to talk to them early. We started to talk to them in ways that we didn't speak to them before, not just saying, give us your name, I'll do a quick check and see if you want it. We started to ask questions. We did a little profile where we asked them questions, a bit like a criminal profile. It did look like a criminal profile, but it asked questions like, where do you sleep? Who would we call if something happened to you? Like if you were ill or something happened, where do you keep your stuff? So if you have an episode or we need to grab your stuff, because that's their whole world, that's their whole kit and caboodle, everything in their swag, their ID and everything like that. If they lose that, their lives go down the toilet pretty quickly. When we asked these questions, funny things started to happen. Everyone started to view those people like my Uncle Doug. They came back to my office one day and they said, you know that Italian lady in the middle of the mall, that 71-year-old lady's been living there for 2 years with the stuff strapped to a walker, sleeping on those bloody hard wooden benches outside Hungry Jack's. They came back and said, you know, she's a teacher and she's got 2 degrees, she's really well qualified, and she's just had a really bad divorce and lost all her money and she's got no one to help her out, so she's been sleeping there for 2 years. and she can't read and write English very well, so she couldn't fill out a form. They said, what can we do? Good question. What can we do? Not what can someone else do. They asked the right questions. Copper's wanting to do something. I said, well, let's find someone to help her to fill out the form and we'll see what happens. And we've started to form friendships. When we started to ask those questions, people like Micah Project Street to Home team, people like other outreach, Brisbane Youth Service and other people started to trust us and come out with us to talk to people. They housed that woman in 2 weeks. Got her a little flat. She wanted a garden and a bathtub. They bloody put a garden and a bathtub in there so she could live longer and be safer in that house because a police officer spent 5 minutes longer talking to her and treating her with respect and listening to her story. And they showed empathy and they acted on it, and funny things started to happen. More and more of these stories come in. A young copper came in, he gave me his resume. He said, I've got this resume, I want to get a job as a detective. I don't know why, but he said, I've got to get a job as a detective. He said, there's an example in there. He said, you'll like it. It's not real police work. He said, but I know you'll like it. Where he'd spoke to a fella in the gardens who'd been there for 15 years. And he did one of these profiles and he found out that he had family in New South Wales. And he said, do you mind if I just give them a call and let them know they're okay? He said, oh, they don't care about me. No one cares about me. He said, oh, I'll just call them. He said, if it's okay with you. And he rang them. And they were so concerned they'd come up the next month. And he introduced them to this bloke again, reintroduced them, and he went home with them and he lives in a caravan in their yard. He said, I know it's not real police work. I said, mate, if you can't see how that's police work, let me explain it to you. He said, that man will live longer, he will have greater dignity wherever he goes, he won't die in the gardens, and people were dying, homeless people would die regularly and you'd have no one to care for them and no one to care for their remains. There's a study from Melbourne called the Michael Project. It costs $200,000 a year in police and emergency services and ambulance and hospital and corrections to keep someone homeless. It costs $30,000 a year to house them. So you've just saved $200,000 worth of police time and effort and ambulance time and effort because you spoke to a person and treated them with respect, treated them with dignity, and you did something about what you saw, even though it probably wasn't your job. And I got a little bit of criticism from higher up, believe it or not. There's some people up there said, Cory Allen, friend of the homeless, it's a bit of a joke, isn't it, you know? What's he doing about the crime? Good news. We did funny things. Every time I've developed a little project, and I developed heaps of little tiny projects, so I didn't have an original idea in my life. I stole them from everyone else I knew, which is great, because young coppers would come to me and say, oh, these kids love doing graffiti, why don't we sit down and do some graffiti with them that's positive? Talks about how we should be together. So we got a group of the street kids together and we got an artist. We paid him $1,500 I got from some dodgy grant the government gave out at the time, and we did some art. They spent the first 2 hours bitching about the police, saying how nasty we were and how difficult things were, and then we said, all right, how should it be? You tell us, how should it be? What should the relationship look like? Because we don't want to fight you at 2 o'clock in the morning and have all this drama because it's not helping anybody. And they said, well, we just want some respect. I said, and that's what you say all the time. The coppers are saying, oh, we just want you to treat us with some respect. So isn't it funny? We were saying the same thing. And believe it or not, I got the police to put that up in the mall post. And you know how police hate graffiti. They don't like putting that stuff up. And then they looked at it and said, oh, that's actually quite insightful, isn't it? We are saying the same thing. We just want some respect. And they just want some respect. So let's start with that. You've got to give it to those kids. On that police officer, there's the registered number there. It's a copper they don't like. They put him on there. He's a bit of a bugger. And they put his registered number on there just to have a dig at him. You've got to give him credit for that. Now, I was asked many times about all the time and effort I was investing, and I had a fantastic group of people, 128 coppers at City, who some believed it, some understood it, some disliked it intensely, but most of them did it, and they went out and they offered help to people every time we saw them. I got them to offer help through the police referral project. I got them to develop little partnerships where we did things like playing games in Time Zone with street kids during the day for 2 hours for free. One of my friends from school owns Time Zone. He gave us a bit of arcade game time. He thought the coppers were going to come and play. I brought half a dozen street kids in with us the first time. He was a bit upset, but he got over it. But just to increase those interactions that police had with people that led them to have personal conversations and to show respect. Not when they were in conflict or in crisis or having a drama, but talk to people early, talk to them often, talk to them and get to know them, ask them questions about, you know, where do you come from? How come you're here now? Ask what the problem might be in the background. Offer some help if you can. And then if you still got to arrest someone, that's okay. I still love arresting people. Like had a lot of fun arresting people in my day. But we've got to arrest the right people. We were arresting a lot of people for disobeying a move on direction. That's police telling you need to be somewhere else, get on your bike, and that didn't work out very well. Often it would end up in a disobey move on direction charge, obstruct police charge, assault police, an injury in custody, the police would be injured, a complaint against police, a lawsuit, a court case, a court brief. I'm adding up the dollars there, or because we couldn't talk to someone in a way that would get them to leave when they needed to leave. So somehow, when police got to talk to homeless people and young kids and do this engagement, and I got the frontline police to do it, not all the crime prevention police who get it, I got the police, the hard-nosed coppers who work the shifts and do everything to do it. They stopped arresting people for move-on directions, and we started to invest that time in something else. All that conflict was that we were wasting on having confrontation with young people and other people, we could reinvest. We still gave between 100 and 150 move-on directions a year, but people actually listened to us, so we must have been doing it in a way that was effective. The other good measure was the number of times people punch you in the face. I think that's probably a good measure of if you're doing a good job, if less people want to punch you or hurt you. So less people wanted to hurt us. We went from about 135 assaults a year down to 35 at its lowest point. That's probably a great performance measure. And in the background, while I was being grilled about the crime and the other things, complaints against police dropped 50%. Robberies came down 41%. Property crime came down 51%. Assaults came down 34%. They said, "What'd you do about the crime? You must have run some big kick-ass crime operations and focused on some repeat offenders." I said, "No, I just got police to help people." We stopped arresting the wrong people so we could arrest the right people. We got people from the community to trust and help and work with us because they could see that we were trying to do the right thing, and we got friendships and partnerships, and the community in the city sadly doesn't have a neighbourhood watch group, so there's a challenge for Neighbourhood Watch to get a city group going in some way or form, whether it be technological or personal. And police learned to talk to people and solve problems better, and crime came down remarkably. Didn't cost any extra money. I got a little bit of funding from here and there. Didn't cost any extra time. They were actually taking police off me and sending them down the valley on Saturday nights to help out and other things. So it just goes to show when you actually work with the community and with people in a way that shows respect, in a way that treats people properly, in a way that shows empathy and you act on it, you can make magnificent differences in your local area, which I know is something that you probably all do today. Now, City Police is a diverse group, and I say that not in a tokenistic way. The city and the valley and some of the big stations around Queensland really are the examples of what the next generation of police are going to look like. They're not all 6-foot-tall football players that drink beer like it probably was when I joined. They're sometimes not so tall people like me. They're sometimes from different races, religions and cultures. And you know what? Police don't really care. As long as you're a good person, you've got good values, you show up and do your work, people are welcome in these organisations and they do a fantastic job. And they get a good result because they're open to working with the community because they feel like they're part of the community that you represent in Neighbourhood Watch, part of the community that you represent in the time that you give, that remind us how valuable that is. I'd hate to add up the dollar factor for the volunteer time that Neighbourhood Watch contributes. So today it's my pleasure to have perhaps shown you a story that you probably won't read in the newspaper because it's not that sensational. It's just about people being police, helping people, treating them with respect, working with the community to get a better outcome. Doesn't sound so difficult after all, does it? Thank you.